It's not hard to imagine South Street in February of 2005. We've all seen Philadelphia depicted on the screen 1,000 times. The steps in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, so famous from the Rocky movies. Independence Hall, where both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were signed. And more commonplace but equally character-defining row houses shoulder to shoulder in working class, and some would say gentrified, neighborhoods. But for a second, just imagine it's cold. The sun set hours ago. Chimneys all over the city belch hot gases into the frigid indigo sky. It's almost midnight, a Saturday. South Street is alive with party people. That is our setting, because that's where Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone disappeared. The website for the Federal Bureau of Investigation holds listings for Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. under the heading Kidnappings/Missing Persons. Their listing reads simply, Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone were last seen leaving a bar/restaurant in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the late evening hours of February 19, 2005. The two were dating. They have not been seen nor heard from since this last sighting. Petrone's vehicle, a 2001 black over silver Dodge Dakota pickup truck with Pennsylvania license plates YFH2319, is also missing. There may be a NASCAR sticker in the rear window. Danielle and Richard both had children from prior relationships. Richard's daughter, Angela, was 14, and Danielle had a son who was still a toddler. Nobody could imagine a scenario in which they would abandon their kids willingly. Something was wrong. There was no sign of Danielle, Richard, or Richard's truck. They simply vanished. In a disappearance like Danielle and Richard's, we have nothing. Only reports and accounts and some theories. We'll have to do the best we can with what we have to answer one question. What happened to Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr.? In 2005, Danielle was going through a divorce from Joe Imbo, her husband of 3 years, and had returned to using her maiden name, Odebre. She was the daughter of John Odebre, a Philly lounge singer who went by the name Johnny October and gained national fame in the 50s doo-wop group The Four Dates. When Danielle got pregnant, she had put her own musical dreams to rest and left her position as the lead singer for a pop rock band called The Schoolboys. Then, a couple of years later, as she put her marriage to Joe Imbo in her rearview mirror and sparked a new beginning, she rekindled an on-again off-again romance with Richard Petrone, a childhood friend from the neighborhood. Richard, a single dad, worked primarily for his parents at Viking Pastries and had become a masterful wedding cake designer. He reportedly didn't date much until he reconnected with Danielle. On the night of February 19th, 2005, an unseasonably cold night, even for Philadelphia, Danielle had been socializing with family over dinner and asked to be dropped off at a tap room where Richard was having a drink. Later, the two moved their festivities to the bar and restaurant where they were last seen. The place was called Abilene, at 429 South Street, a skinny little single-lane one-way street, historic, pedestrian-friendly, and lined with souvenir shops and places to grab a bite and a brew. There, Danielle and Richard met with friends and watched a live band, then said their goodbyes at about 11:45 p.m. I wish I could say that someone saw them walk to Richard's truck and get in and drive away, but we can't even say that. The most we can say is that they were alive on the sidewalk as they left the bar. Richard Petrone's best friend, Rick Bellezzi, would tell a reporter they left the club happy at about 11:45. According to the Philadelphia Daily News, Anthony Valentino and his wife Michelle McLaughlin were the last people to see Danielle and Richard. It was a normal kind of night, Valentino said. We were sitting by the bar, and when we left, we just hugged and said goodbye. That was the last time I saw them. Everything after that is dark. The next morning, members of both families were making phone calls, looking for Danielle and Richard. Danielle's brother, also John Odebre, named after their father, arrived at her Mount Laurel, New Jersey home looking for her. His mom had called and said Danielle missed her hair appointment at 11 a.m. Worried, he rushed over and looked around her condo. It did not appear to him that she had been home the previous night. Likewise, Richard's family was worried. He had been planning to watch the Daytona 500 at home with friends, but nobody had heard from him. Now, let's be honest. In a city like Philadelphia, people go missing all the time for all kinds of reasons. People who ran out on their family, people who got killed, people who got hammered and maybe had a lost weekend at the club. These people don't make the papers every day. In Philly, they tend to give it a while to see how the case shakes out. In the case of Danielle and Richard, their names did not show up in the local media for about a week. On February 26, 2005, the Camden Courier-Post ran a story with the headline, "Mount Laurel Woman, 34, Missing Since February 19th. The piece relates the known facts of the case and gives a physical description of Danielle. She is described as a fair-skinned white woman, about 5'5" and 120 pounds, with hazel eyes and brown hair. She was wearing a black jacket, a cream-colored sweater, blue jeans, and carrying a two-handle black purse. Richard Petrone was described as 5'9" and about 150 pounds. In the days after their disappearance, Richard's then 14-year-old daughter Angela gave an absolutely heart-wrenching public plea for the return of her dad that is very hard to watch. By early March, a reward fund had already grown to $12,000 for information on the whereabouts of Danielle and Richard. The community was engaged, but there were no leads to be found. In June, Danielle's brother John expressed frustration at a lack of clues. Not a lipstick, not a bag, not a shoe, not a car, not an eyewitness, not a tip, said Imbo's brother John Odebray. Not anything. If there's any hope of finding answers in a case like this, we have to narrow the scope of the investigation. Not even the best-funded investigation can run down every thread of every possibility. We have to increase the probability of success by chasing down the most likely solutions first. And as such, we need to know what is the nature of this disappearance. Not what is it, but what could it be? It could be a case of a willful disappearance on the part of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone. Is it? Based on everything I've read, no. But it could be. It could be a murder-suicide. If the person driving the truck was consumed with homicidal and suicidal intent, he or she could have easily driven the truck into the icy February waters of the Delaware River in a spot where we haven't found it yet. Is it either of these things? It could be, but most agree it's very unlikely. Danielle and Richard were not the type to abandon their kids, and nobody had any reason to suspect either of them were depressed or considering suicide in any way. So what else could it be? It could also be a car accident that ended in the same way, at the bottom of the river, with Richard and Danielle trapped inside. That's a theory that has been recently investigated more thoroughly, but we'll get to that later. With no answers, you can imagine their families were tortured. You feel like you're trapped, said Petrone's father, Richard. Each day is the same. It's like you're in this awful dream, and you're caught in quicksand. However, the details offered by the Philadelphia Daily News were not good. Ominously, the couple's cell phones have not been used in the last 2 weeks, and there has been no activity on their credit cards or in their bank accounts, their families say. A lot of time had since passed, but the police were finally making a good show of it. Per an article, police in Philadelphia and New Jersey, where the couple were apparently headed, have launched an intense investigation, checking financial records, interviewing family, friends, and neighbors, even searching the banks of the Delaware River by helicopter. We haven't found anything to indicate foul play, but all of our options remain open, said Captain Joseph O'Brien of the Philadelphia Police South Detective Division. In April, police said publicly they did not believe the couple simply ran away, which eliminated one possibility. It was not a willful disappearance. All of those things considered, the million-dollar question then becomes, is it foul play? And if so, who and why? FBI agent Vito Roselli has worked the case since day one, and he told ABC7 in an interview, "I'm confident that it was murder, that there was foul play." He also believes multiple people know. Of course, Agent Roselli won't reveal more than that, but it's beginning to sound a little bit familiar. A little bit like the Carriaga murders in Washington state, which I covered in a recent episode. A case where it seems like the authorities might have a strong suspect, but cannot prove it. In the Carriaga case, that suspect's name is publicly known. In this case, we don't know who it is. So if we just take Agent Roselli's word for it, he is the expert in this case after all, and assume that there was foul play in this case, my personal reflex, not just in this case but in almost every other case, is to suspect the ex-spouses first. Statistics show for the year 2013, 15 times as many women were murdered by a male they knew than were killed by male strangers, and of the victims who knew their offenders, 62% were wives, common-law wives, ex-wives, or girlfriends of the offender. So let's take a look at Joe Imbo. You may have been wondering earlier, where was Danielle's son while she was out Saturday night? He was with his dad, Joe Imbo. It was Joe's weekend for visitation and he was scheduled to bring back the boy on Sunday morning. That's an interesting fact, right? As I told you earlier, Danielle's brother, John Odebray, showed up looking for her at her condo that morning when he heard that she had missed her hair appointment. Other family members showed up, and then, just as expected, Joe Imbo showed up to return their son to Danielle. John would later tell ABC7 that Joe Imbo seemed surprised to find a bunch of Danielle's family at her place, but she wasn't there. "Where's Danielle?" he asked. Danielle's family were worried, yes, but they were not expecting the worst. They were still hoping for the best. John answered Joe Imbo with a spontaneous white lie and said that Danielle had just run to get something at the store and would be back soon, he later recalled. "At that point, I didn't think there had been any type of foul play. I was just trying to cover up for her." He did not know why Danielle wasn't there, but he also didn't want to give her soon-to-be ex-husband anything that he could later use against her. It was perhaps a lost opportunity for the family to, at the very least, get a gauge for Joe Imbo's body language. Unfortunately, none of them had their heads in that place. There was no doubt that there had been some tension between Joe Imbo and Richard Petrone, though. In April 2005, the Allentown Morning Call reported, Joseph Imbo has said he made it clear in telephone conversations with Petrone that he did not like that his wife was involved with him. Imbo also said he tried to win his estranged wife back. Then there was this weird bit at the end of the article. Joseph Imbo, as well as relatives of Petrone and friends of Danielle Imbo, all said that she told both men she did not want to spend her life with either of them, not long before she and Petrone disappeared. I'll admit, that part makes me a little nervous. My murder meter swings proportionally with a situation's resemblance to an episode of Jerry Springer. Joe Imbo, on the surface, seemed to be saying the right things though, as reported by the Philadelphia Daily News. Danielle's estranged husband, Joe Imbo, says he believes he'll see her again. "I can't look into my son's eyes and think she's not coming back," he said. Joe reportedly had a rock-solid alibi for the night of the disappearance. He had been socializing at a gathering with family and friends who also happened to be law enforcement. Is it just me, or is that alibi almost too perfect, hanging out with cops at the time of the disappearance? In the summer of 2005, cracks first appeared in the relationship between the families, with the Petrone family particularly suspicious of Joe Imbo. Danielle's family believed the bad blood between the Petrones and Joe Imbo was counterproductive. The relationship between them was fractured. Joe Imbo claimed to have taken a polygraph and that the police told him he passed. "I have nothing to hide," Imbo said. When asked for comment, the authorities said they don't comment on lie detector test, but that nobody had been cleared in their investigation. In August, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran a story on a police dredging operation that generated some buzz and prompted a denial from the authorities. Police denied reports yesterday that a crew was dredging the Delaware River in search of a vehicle belonging to Richard Petrone Jr., who with his girlfriend disappeared from the vicinity of a Philadelphia bar 6 months ago. A police marine unit was searching the river at Cumberland because it was a known dumping spot for stolen vehicles and cars involved in insurance fraud, a police spokesman said. So police were looking for vehicles, they just didn't want people to think that they were looking for Richard and Danielle specifically. Nevertheless, their search got results. Per the article, 9 vehicles were pulled out of the river yesterday, police said. 3 to 5 remained in the murky water after the search was stalled by bad weather, but police said none was known to be a Dodge Dakota. Today would be Richard Petrone's 36th birthday, according to a family website. Suspicions about Joe Imbo, a police dredging operation rumored to be related, a mysterious polygraph test. It felt like something was about to happen, but nothing did. Danielle and Richard's names appeared in the local print media a little less frequently as time went by, but even when it did, you and I both know it did not amount to much because Richard and Danielle were still missing. This leaves us with only one explanation that makes sense. It had to be foul play. Somewhere in the city of brotherly love, there had been a dark conspiracy. At least, that's what the FBI said, and at the time, it was a complete bombshell. On February 6, 2008, nearly 3 years after the vanishing, the FBI announced that they were investigating the disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. as a hit. Per their announcement, the FBI announced yesterday that investigators believed that Richard Petrone and his girlfriend, Danielle Imbo, might have been killed in a murder-for-hire plot. Tips throughout time have indicated logically that this is not a kidnapping case. We're looking very closely at a murder-for-hire scenario, said FBI spokeswoman Jerry Williams. We're not going to be able to go into great detail, but we thought it would be significant for the public to understand that this hasn't gone away. We're aggressively pursuing a scenario that's based on leads and tips we have received. With this decision to investigate the case as a potential murder for hire came a change of scenery. The case, as a disappearance, had been handled by Philadelphia South detectives, but was now due to be transferred to the homicide unit. According to the Philadelphia Daily News, Richard Petrone Sr. considered the admission from the FBI a small victory. It was somewhat of a surprise, Petrone Sr. said. The FBI decided to come out with something that we felt has been the case from day one, that it was a murder. It was good to hear them say that on the record, so there really can't be any confusion about what's happened. It seems to be clear that this was a murder, right? So if it is, how did they do it? If you're an amateur sleuth like myself, you immediately want to pull up Google Earth and plot the location of the truck on South Street, the path that Danielle and Richard walked from Abilene to get to the truck, the driving route they would take to get to Danielle's Mount Laurel, New Jersey home, all in the hope of shedding some light on the situation through a visual representation. Unfortunately, in this case, we can't do that because nobody has any idea where Richard was parked. Nobody could say. They vanished. John Odebray, Danielle's brother, told the Philadelphia Daily News. They walked out of Abilene, and from the minute they got out the door, no one knows if they turned left or right. We don't even know if they made it to New Jersey. So we have to go abstract. It was brutally cold that night. My experience in a cold climate tells me that Richard and Danielle were likely hand in hand, or perhaps arm in arm, on a slippery sidewalk, as they hurried toward the truck. South Street is a single-lane one-way street with a parking lane on each side, bordered closely with business storefronts. Hundreds of cars and trucks were parked up and down the street. If, as the FBI maintained, this was a murder for hire, the person who hired the hitman likely furnished him with a description of Richard's Dodge Dakota. Did he cruise the streets outside of Richard's frequent hangout until he located the vehicle? The killer or killers might have been watching as Danielle and Richard approached the truck. It was likely a crowded spot though. Depending on where the truck was parked, an attacker would risk losing control of the situation or being witnessed by a reveler on South Street if he attacked at that moment. And obviously, firing any kind of weapon would make far too much noise. If Richard's truck was parked down the block a distance, however, there were dark places in front of temporarily vacant storefronts, where a potential attacker could approach the couple out of the dark and stick a gun in their ribs just as they opened the door to Richard's truck. It would be a simple matter from there to slide right into the truck with the two of them and force them to drive to wherever they met their end. Is that how it went down? Did an accomplice follow them in a second vehicle to a second crime scene? Honestly, we can only speculate. It also doesn't escape my attention that if this is a murder-for-hire plot, Joe Imbo's alibi does not exclude him from suspicion. In 2015, the Philadelphia Daily News recognized the 10-year anniversary of the disappearance of Danielle and Richard with an interview of the Petrones, who still felt the weight of the mystery. "You always feel it, it never goes away," Marge Petrone said. "You can't imagine outliving your child." The FBI had last released information on the case in 2008, 7 years prior, and there had been no movement in it in the years since. When asked if their son could still be alive somewhere, Marge waved a hand. "No, please, come on, no," she said. Marge Petrone had actually been on record since 2005, about 6 months after the disappearance, that she believed Richard was dead. She and Richard Sr. had long since grieved their son. With an entire decade gone, the team had been whittled down, but refused to give up, the story said. The Petrones, Danielle's family, and one dogged FBI special agent continue to hope for a break, something that can lift the fog and let them ultimately know where the road took the two. Agent Roselli had not backed down from the Bureau's position, that the disappearance had been an organized hit. The caveat is that anything's possible in this, but pretty much from off the bat, you could rule out a crime of convenience, Roselli said. "You have to know how to get rid of 2 bodies and a truck quickly, and it would be hard for one person to do that." Again, as they had so many times before, investigators vowed to redouble their efforts on the anniversary, reanalyzing old files and evidence for anything they had overlooked, re-interviewing old witnesses, and again, they came up empty. On the 15th anniversary, in 2020, the FBI again pleaded for information from the public. The FBI, Philadelphia Police Department, New Jersey State Police, Mount Laurel Police Department, and Burlington County Prosecutor's Office are seeking the public's assistance as we continue to investigate the disappearance, 15 years ago today, of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. Their statement reiterated the facts of the case, then mentioned a reward. This investigation into Danielle and Rich's disappearance remains open and active, and there is still a $50,000 reward for information on the couple's whereabouts, or for information leading to the arrest of those responsible for their disappearance. The reward is being administered by the Philadelphia Citizens Crime Commission. The disappearance of Richard and Danielle actually has several reward funds, including one administered by the Petrone family that has grown to more than $100,000. That is, change your life money for a person who has the right tip. Unfortunately, as is so common with cold cases, the flow of information in Danielle and Richard's disappearance has dwindled to a trickle. I can't help but feel that the answer to this case is the missing truck. If we can find the missing truck, we'll find Richard and Danielle. It might not give us the identity of those responsible, but at least the families could finally grieve and rest. So, where is the truck? There are only a couple of ways to get rid of a truck. The easiest way to hide a vehicle with the lowest effort is a body of water. First instinct, right? Sure, there are other ways to dispose of a vehicle. A devious murderer could arrange to scrap a truck piece by piece, but that would involve other people in the plot, people who helped dismantle the truck, people who bought the parts, and would also run a strong risk that someone who was not a part of the plot could see the truck while they had it stored in a garage somewhere as they parted it out. So, not likely. You could dump the vehicle in the wilderness somewhere, pour gas all over it, and set it on fire. In that case, you'd have to make sure that the fire completely destroyed anything identifiable about the truck, the distinctive black over silver paint scheme, for example, and you would have to clip the VIN number from the dash, take the license plates, and even those measures would only buy time. Not to mention a killer who dumps and burns a truck in the wilderness has to get back to town somehow. Did someone follow him in another vehicle? Did the transfer take place on someone else's property? Again, the killer is involving other people in the plot when there is a simpler way to accomplish his evil deeds. Paraphrasing Occam's razor, all things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be true. Everyone's gut says pretty much the same thing. So, with that being said, the truck must be in a body of water somewhere, right? In the spring of 2022, a privately funded dive research team from Oregon, Adventures with Purpose, announced they were taking an interest in the case, and they were riding high with a surprising success rate considering the cold case nature of the disappearances they'd recently investigated. In the fall of 2021, they took on 36 missing persons cases and actually found 11 missing people. Using maps and accounts of the missing person's last known whereabouts, their home, and their destination, founder Jared Lysick has been able to locate a surprising number of vehicles, many times with remains still in them, in which the missing simply, for unknown reasons, drove their vehicle into a body of water. A recent example is the case of Matthew Jed Hall, a story I covered on this podcast. But with that being said, usually their cases involve car accidents, and in this case, the FBI's belief is that this was a murder for hire. The disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. has been a cold case for nearly 20 years at this point, and I think that this is a good place to ruminate on unresolved cases like this. So why do cases go cold? There are the obvious reasons, things that we have seen before. Through chance or planning, a criminal pulls off a crime with no witnesses and no evidence. In that case, the case remains unsolved. Or an investigation is bungled so badly from the start that it's nearly impossible to recover, in which case the case goes cold. Or the person who committed the crime died shortly thereafter and left behind nobody who knew the truth, in which case you get a cold case. There are a million Hollywood reasons like that. There are also some more pedestrian reasons, equally as damaging but grounded in our human emotions and interpersonal complexities mixed with feelings of self-worth. Sometimes a family member might be less than forthcoming with information in a criminal case due to a feeling of shame, such as the killer might be my uncle, something like that. Less than perfect families are sometimes shamed by investigators or regarded with skepticism in a way that causes them to stop communicating helpfully. If that person has the piece of information that would break the case but never shares it, shame wins, and the case goes cold. However, one of the least appreciated and often overlooked reasons a case goes cold is simply perspective. The best detectives will tell you they consider all options, from every perspective. So maybe this case is cold because the police have been investigating it as a murder-for-hire plot since 2008 and potentially overlooking other explanations, like maybe an accidental trip to the bottom of the Delaware River. Maybe there's a totally different explanation for their disappearance, an alternate chain of events that we haven't even really considered so far. What if Richard and Danielle decided to go park down on the piers and make out for a little bit? What if Richard slipped up while parking, or made a mistake while driving? In a video that can still be found online via the Daily Voice, Adventures with Purpose chronicled their search of the river in March of 2022. Founder Jared Lysick explains a search of one area in the Delaware River, where a witness reported a broken gate at a launch ramp 2 days after the couple went missing.
These are like the old piers that are down here, and they're labeled now as private property, no trespassing. They have some, fencing up there. But again, coming back to 2005, how much fencing was up here? What access did you have? Is this a potential place to dump vehicles or a dumping ground in general? Place of suicides, place of accident. You come out here, Lover's Lane, late at night, and then you accidentally put it into drive instead of reverse. There's a lot of possibilities as to what could happen out here. And that's why we're out here scanning and searching each one of these to make sure that we clear the entire area, to make sure there's no vehicles underwater that we need to clear.
Unfortunately, their search did not find Richard Petrone's 2001 Dodge Dakota.
We've covered everything now from Dave & Buster's, all the way down from Ben Franklin Bridge down to the Whitman Bridge. If anything, I can turn to the family and say, you know what? I feel 99.867% that they are not within this area.
On one hand, Danielle and Richard had a few drinks that night. It's possible whoever was driving the vehicle was a little impaired and just made a costly error. A wrong turn, a slip of a foot off the brake pedal. But Adventures with Purpose searched all the obvious areas in that particular stretch of river and did not find the car in their search in March of 2022. In the absence of any discovery by Adventures with Purpose, would you consider it more likely that the disappearance of Danielle and Richard was foul play? Lysak has vowed to continue searching, and I guess we'll just have to eagerly await any developments. At some point after the disappearance, Joe Imbo moved to the Carolinas with the son that he had with Danielle, Joe III, and to this day he maintains his innocence, and he has never been named an official suspect by the police. At last report, Danielle's family had a strained relationship with Joe, but they do occasionally get to see her son, Joe III. Marge and Richard Petrone Sr. have, at times, thrown what some would call thinly veiled shade at Danielle and her family. Marge Petrone has said that if it was a murder-for-hire plot, she does not believe that Richard was the target of the hit. Richard was in the wrong place at the wrong time, she said. That sounds like a perfectly innocent statement to some, but perhaps a nasty insinuation to others. That perhaps Danielle was the target, through some unspoken fault of her own, and that she got Richard killed too. To me, this is how murder and disappearances destroy families. From the inside out, with guilt and suspicion and shame and resentment. Do you have any information that could bring resolution to this case? At present, the total reward money is well over 6 figures for any information that leads to the discovery of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr., or the person or persons responsible for their disappearance. That means everybody, even people who saw something or heard something unusual but did not understand how important it was. If you call in the tip and it leads to some kind of resolution, you are going to get paid, per the FBI. Anyone with information that may assist investigators is urged to call the Citizens Crime Commission tip line at 215-546-TIPS. That's 215-546-8477. Tipsters can remain anonymous. Until you or someone like you comes forward with the tip that brings this case to a close, the disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. will remain unresolved.